It's not only that stress makes us unhealthy and forgetful and maybe even demented and dead earlier, stress makes us tunnel visioned. If you've got a choice between more of a sense of control, or more of a sense of outlets, or more of a sense of predictability, or more social support is the way to do it every single time. One of the most interesting, important things that stress does is it decreases our capacity for empathy. Every single aspect of the criminal justice system is sheer raving medieval gibberish, which often is viewed as kind of off-putting when I first kind of voiced this to, say, a bunch of lawyers. One classic study, this was looking at more than 5,000 court decisions. The single best predictor of what a judge was going to decide was how many hours it had been since the judge had had a meal. Right after lunch, 60% parole rate. By 3-4 hours later, down to 0%. Judge has a snack, back up. 90% of people who are murderers in this country have a whole conglomeration of adverse childhood experiences that set you up for a brain that has a whole lot of trouble with empathy and impulse control and long-term planning and things of that sort. Like, you have a car whose brakes are broken, you obviously don't let it out on the street being driven. It's dangerous. You fix it if you can, and if you can't fix it, you lock it up in the garage for the rest of time, but you don't sit there and say, that car deserves not to be able to take a ride in the park on a Sunday afternoon when it's beautiful out. Its brakes are broken, and we're biological machines. And this is a shift that is beyond certainly the American criminal justice system by centuries worth of insight. Most of where our stances are coming from is from emotions, and there's a lot of subterranean emotional pain that brings people to where they are. And then you got another thing that creeps in, which is a part of the brain called the frontal cortex. What does the frontal cortex do? It makes you do the right thing when that's the harder thing to do. At those critical moments, do you do the right thing, even though it's the harder thing to do, is a purely biological phenomenon. And then we invent words like evil and punishment and retribution. When you look at the upper 10 percentile of income in this country and the bottom 10 percentile, life expectancy difference is more than 20 years. So, obvious answer, poor people have less access to health care. That doesn't explain it in the slightest. Okay, it's because poor people have higher rates of smoking, higher rates of drinking to excess. That explains only about 1/3 of the variability. What it's about is the psychological stress of being poor. It's not being poor, it's feeling poor. And what is it that is the surest way to make the poor feel poor? Rubbing their noses in it. It's not being poor, it's being poor surrounded by the haves and being reminded of it over and over. What happens when you have high degrees of income inequality in a community? People stop trusting each other. People stop having a sense of efficacy. Tenant unions don't work very well. People don't bother joining unions of any sort. People don't join because you have no sense of collective efficacy. You then wind up in communities that are less healthy, less safe, less kind, less generous. Like, yeah, there's advantages to this, and then along comes something like 9/11, and we discover we don't know the names of our neighbors. We're going to get to a point where we really can't tell the difference between whether we are talking to a person or a machine, let alone which one we prefer. Doctors are going to be put out of business soon by machines. AIs are better at spotting melanomas than human dermatologists are by now. There's an epidemic of post-traumatic stress disorder now with people coming back from our various foreign ventures in Afghanistan, etc. And one part of the brain called the amygdala, which does fear and anxiety and aggression, you have PTSD and your amygdala neuroplastically gets bigger than normal and it has trouble shutting off. And thus, you never ever feel safe. What the studies show are force your brain to take somebody else's perspective. I'm not asking you to agree with them, but if they had to say why they are so upset about what's been done to them, what would they say? Force your brain to individuate other people. I'm not asking you to agree with them. Force your brain to individuate other people.